Alright, so now we're going to get into adding in texture to the hair. Now the hair is going to be a little more complicated, so we're going to have to make some more complicated shapes. You'll notice that I basically kind of have a very repetitive technique to this, but let's get started by just putting some initial stuff for the hair. I'm going to lighten the hair up, just so I have some room to go for my shadows. And I'm going to add a new layer that I'll call it shadows, or hair shadows. And we can just reduce the opacity of the basic shape of the hair and for the other stuff, or we can go into our layers menu here and click on the eyeball icon. Every time you click on the eyeball icon, you won't actually see the little path of the shape. So you'll notice, once again, with no fill and a visible color, what I'm doing is I'm clicking, making a curve to form the hair, clicking once to keep it from bending again, and then curving back in on it. So I'm creating these sort of in and out, sort of whip-like, tendril-like, hair-like streaks, because that's kind of the sort of pattern that the hair creates. Now, you'll notice that this is not simply just like the idea that she has highlights in her hair, which she does. She has some color highlights in her hair, but also the hair kind of piles on itself, and it sort of stacks onto itself and creates little areas of shadow and stuff. And so by virtue of the hair itself causing the shadows themselves have to take on the shape of the hair, otherwise they don't look good. So keep that in mind as you go through. Now, you don't have to make it nearly as complicated as I am, but if you want it to look good, this is a good technique to do, kind of pulling in and out and sort of following along. Again, you know, I'm not following an exact 1-to-1 ratio here, but you might see things that I don't. I might see things that you don't. You might be totally mystified by my choices here. So this next one's going to be a little complicated as well, because I'm essentially going along the bottom of this sort of shadow that sort of occurs on the top of her hair. The shadow that occurs on the top of her head is mostly due to the fact that the light is coming from in front of her, not really from above her. And so there's this area of hair that's a little bit brighter than the hair on top of her head. So I'm going to go across sort of this kind of crown of her hair. And again, I'm going to have to come all the way back once I reach the end of this particular shadow. And I want to still maintain that sort of hair-like pattern to the shadow itself. Okay, so this is a good point for me to stop. You know, like again, you can find the moment where you want to stop and pull back. I think I wanted just to keep this a little simpler, so I decided to come back here. And once again, I'm making these little tendril shapes and trying to fit them in without having to overlap and without overlapping the large area, you know, without overlapping the outer path of the hair itself. You can probably simplify the lines over here once we get to more broad areas, but right here, this will end it there. Alright, so we'll just continue making some of these shapes here. There's just some random shadows here. You can see this dark area of the hair. Obviously, you might see things that I don't. I found some of the bangs. The bangs here, or like this area right above the hairline, I noticed was you kind of have that overlap onto the forehead, and we'll kind of cut that out later. There's a little darker area here. I'll just bring everything back and a little button on our layer just to darken everything all at the same time. And what we can do here is we can actually click on the hair on the base layer, Control-C, Control-F, and then use that to do the little intersection with the shadow areas. So you just duplicate the hair, then select the shadow that's overlapping onto the face, and then what you can do is you can you could do a little intersect with the Pathfinder tool for that. Alright, so now we're just going to repeat what we did for shadows, but this time for highlights. So we're looking for areas of the hair that are pointedly lighter, and once again we're using these sort of strand-like, streak-like patterns here that sort of resemble hair, just to get those out. So I'm going to reduce my fill, and I'm going to pull up my stroke just so I can see a little better, mark it out with a different thing, different layer, and yeah, so once again, this is just kind of down to the artist. The more detail you put into this, the better this looks. I do want to see this technique demonstrated though. Make sure that you are at least attempting to do these sort of in-out kind of streaks here, because otherwise this technique kind of falls apart, especially when it comes to the hair. That's why we have the hair be a different thing. Alright, so you know, sometimes the highlights can kind of come near the shadows, and obviously like your lighter parts, you know, will be part of your midtones, but you want to be just as obviously you can't have the entire thing be highlights. You have to have some darker areas in order for the lighter areas to kind of come out. So this one right here, these little strands of hair, I kind of marked those away. That this also gives the hair a little bit of body to it, a little bit of a texture to it, a little bit of a kind of third dimension to it as well. So we'll just bring everything back up into visibility, select all of the, a little more at the bottom fringe here. And again, in and out, and creating this sort of complex array of streaks, again, can lend it to, in this case, they're all curved the same way. It'll give the hair a little bit more shape to it. So hitting this little button over here, we can select them all, we can fill them in with a lighter color of gray, we can reduce the visibility of our base layer, and hey, we've got our little lady here. So let's go ahead and export this as a JPEG and submit this to the proper file, proper folder on D2L, and make sure you're saving your progress as a .ai file so you can come back in, and for the next one we'll add in colors. Very cool. Cannot wait to see you guys produce. See you in class.